part 4 of my series on buying businesses and scaling through acquisitions. I originally thought part 4, I was going to be talking about NDAs, confidentiality agreements, and starting with the due diligence phase. But this morning, I'm like, you know what, before we get there, we really need to talk about something that's really, really important. Is your business actually ready for an acquisition? Because one of the lessons I've learned through this process is that you can't skip stages of building a business. If you try to scale before you've built the foundation underneath you, those missing pieces are going to show up. And believe me, the acquisition has a really good way of finding them for you. One of my mentors, Eddie Wilson, teaches an empire builder that there are 5 stages of building a business, and that's what we're going to talk about today. First one, startup, perseverance, viability, scale, and succession. And I want to walk you through these because understanding what stage of business you're in is actually really important before you go and buy other companies. So the first stage is startup. Startup is exactly what it sounds like. You just started your business, and most businesses start because they're really, really good at something. Maybe you're an accountant, maybe you're a contractor, a plumber, a consultant, doing lawn care. The point is you have a skill or a passion. And so you decided, you know what? I'm tired of working for someone else. I'm going to start a business and start doing this. The problem is you're really, really good at knowing what you do. However, that doesn't necessarily mean you're really good at running a business. So you start learning. And you're wearing all the hats. You're doing the work, you're answering the phone, you're doing sales, you're invoicing, you're doing the bookkeeping, you're solving every problem, you're HR, you're hiring, you basically are the business, and that's okay, that's startup. But the next step of the business is perseverance, and that's where you're really getting into some traction. You realize you cannot do this all yourself anymore. You start taking off those hats. Maybe you hire your first employee. Maybe you hire admin. That should be your first employee. That'll take off so much from you. Maybe you start outsourcing certain things, like maybe you finally outsource your bookkeeping. And yes, that is a shameless plug. That is exactly what we do. Because at some point, a business owner has to ask, is spending my Sunday afternoon doing bookkeeping really the best use of my time? No, it is not, unless you love bookkeeping. Most people don't though. So, or would it be working on sales, generating leads, building relationships, and growing the company? Is that where I really should be doing? Yes, that's where you should be working. This is also where you start to build the processes in your building. In your business, you start writing down all the policies and procedures. You start creating those SOPs. You build an org chart and figure out, who do I need to hire? What positions does this company actually need? Who's going to handle operations? Who's going to handle sales? Who's going to handle finances? Who's going to take care of the customers? Who's going to run payroll? And you start to turn this thing into, I own a job, into I own a business. So the third step, we get into viability. So this is the really, really important stage if you're thinking about acquisition. Viability is where you've built something that can actually operate without you. You've got the people, you got the systems, you got the processes, you got the SOPs, you've got customers, you've got revenue, and the business isn't completely dependent on you anymore. One of the ways to think about this stage is can you leave? Can you go on vacation, and not just like a weekend vacation or a week vacation? Can you step away for 2 weeks, 2 months? Will the company continue to operate? And I want to pause right here. Can the company continue to grow while you are gone and run payroll? You're getting new customers. You're not losing customers. Like, it can legitimately operate without contacting you while you are gone. So I literally just tested this. I went to Europe for 2 weeks, had no cell phone service, nothing. And guess what? The company kept running. We got a huge client. We didn't lose any clients. Payroll was on, like, the money moved in the bank accounts. But I did come home. I discovered that there was a few more holes that we needed to figure out. For example, we found some issues in our tax department. So we sat down as a team and asked what happened. Why did it happen? What was missing from the SOPs? How do we make sure it didn't happen again? One example is getting all the way through someone's personal tax return and discovering, wait a minute, they just opened another business this year that we didn't know anything about. So we're tweaking the policies and procedures to add those scenarios in. So what happens now? Who catches it? Who communicates with the client? Who creates that additional engagement? Where does it go in our workflow? Who makes sure that business return gets processed? That was a hole in our process where we worked on fixing it yesterday. So then we're working on updating those SOPs. That part of building a business, that's the part of building a business that can actually operate without everything having to come back on the owner. That's that third phase. That's the phase you need to be in order to start scaling and doing acquisitions. And this is where I learned a big lesson. Last year, I really thought with my first acquisition, I had reached viability. And honestly, I probably had, but it wasn't enough. Like, we were maybe 75 to 85% there. We had really great employees. We had really great systems. We had SOPs. We had workflows. My existing company was largely virtual. Most of the clients already knew how to work with us virtually. I could take vacations. Everything ran smooth. So I thought we're ready to scale. And then when I bought that other accounting practice, that's when I discovered something really important. Your systems may work really well for your existing business, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's ready to absorb someone else's business. The company I acquired operated very differently, and I knew that. The existing clients were my existing clients were largely virtual, and the company that I acquired, they're literally everyone's still walking in the door with boxes of paper, literal boxes of paper, different demographics, different expectations, different workflows. They had different pricing, they had different ways of doing bookkeeping, they had different ways of invoicing, different ways of communicating with clients, and there wasn't the same standardization that I had built with my existing business. Now I knew some of this going into this acquisition, I really did, and I thought, I've done this before. I did this in 2017. I've transitioned from exactly what this office, the one that I'm buying is, into a virtual office. I've done this already. It's not that difficult. I can do it again. How hard can it be? Well, it turns out it was a little bit harder than I anticipated. But what I didn't fully appreciate was my SOPs were built for a company I already had, not necessarily for the company I was about to become. I eventually brought in an outsourced COO. I've done that for the last 3 months to help me get all of our SOPs and operations and build that process together again to incorporate both offices. One's virtual, one's people literally walk in the door still. And the other thing that helped me with that, the SOPs, not the SOPs, the other thing that helped me with my outsourced COO is he literally helped me rebuild that office. During tax season, that whole office was either fired or walked out the door. So that was a nightmare. So I've literally been hiring since February. At the end of July, both companies are fully staffed again, both offices. So, but here's what I want you to understand. An acquisition will expose the weaknesses in your existing company. Okay, now we're at step 4, which is scale. Now we get to the stage that everyone is excited to talk about scaling. I know it's a buzzword. I know it's, everyone's talking about it, everyone's wanting to do it. This is where acquisitions come into the picture for me. You've built the foundation. You've already proven the business is viable. You've built the team. You've built the systems. You've created processes. The company can operate without everything depending on you. Now you can start asking, how do I make this thing bigger? Maybe you ramp up your marketing. Maybe you open additional locations. Maybe you add another service. Maybe you expand geographically. Maybe you start investing your profits elsewhere. Or maybe you start acquiring businesses. Maybe you start doing roll-ups. But here's the key. You need the infrastructure to actually absorb what you're buying. Because if you're still doing everything yourself and you're buying another company, you haven't really scaled. You've just bought yourself another job and probably another headache. That's why knowing which stage you're in matters so much. Don't try to force scale when you're still building viability, because eventually those cracks will show. So stage 5, secession. Finally, Eddie's 5th stage is secession. This goes back to what I've talked about in part 3. Why are you building this business in the first place? What happens to it eventually? You should really be thinking about the end in mind. Maybe the succession plan is selling the company. Maybe you're building a family business that you want to pass down to your kids, but will they want it? Maybe your management team will eventually take over. Maybe you want employees to have ownership. Maybe you maintain ownership while a company team runs the company. Your answer doesn't have to look like mine, but you need an answer. For me, I've already shared what my answer is in part 3. I'm building an asset as part of my retirement strategy. I want to build something that can operate without me, something that's profitable, something that's scalable, something attractive to a future buyer, and ultimately something that has real value when I'm ready to exit. So when I'm thinking about acquisitions today, I'm not only thinking about how much money can this business make me, I'm also thinking, does buying this business help me build the company I ultimately want to own and eventually sell? That's succession. And here's the part I really want you to remember. You can't build your succession plan if the entire business still depends on you. So what stage are you actually in? Are you in startup, perseverance, viability, scale, or succession? You don't want the answer to be based on where you want to be. You need to really look at your business and figure out exactly where you are now, because that was one of my lessons that I learned. I thought I was further into viability and ready for scale than I actually was. Then I made an acquisition, and that acquisition showed me exactly what was still missing in my own company. We fixed a lot of those things. We're still fixing things, and ultimately I believe it's made us a much stronger company. But if you're considering buying another business, learn from my experience. Don't rush scale. Make sure the company you already own has the people, systems, processes, and infrastructure necessary to handle what you're about to add to it. Because buying another business doesn't magically fix the problem in your existing company. It magnifies them. And that has been one of my biggest lessons through this process. So now that we've already talked about whether you're actually ready to buy another business, part 5 is where we're going to get into the deal, the next steps.